Hey, my name is Henry Cole. I'm 29 years old and I live in a small apartment above an old row of shops on the outskirts of Pittsburgh. I don't have much. A beat-up Honda that crossed the 200,000-mile mark so long ago I stopped checking the odometer. A rented garage held together by overdue payments and stubborn hope. And a body trained to keep moving even when the mind begs for rest. Most days, survival feels less like living and more like momentum. Keep moving. Keep working. Keep fixing what breaks. The garage is called Cole Auto Repair. People hear that name and assume ownership means security, like having your name on a sign somehow guarantees success. It doesn't. Not in my case. The truth is, the garage isn't really mine, not the way most people imagine. I still owe money on the lease. I still make monthly payments on the hydraulic lift I bought secondhand from a closing shop outside town. I still carry a small bank loan I took just to keep the lights on through winter. Every month feels like a balancing act over a cliff. But even with all that debt, Cole Auto Repair is the only thing I've ever built entirely with my own hands. That matters. I started working on cars when I was 18. Never went to college. Never learned corporate talk. Never mastered networking or polished business pitches. I just learned machines. I know the difference between a healthy idle and an engine begging for mercy. I know the sound a transmission makes 3 weeks before failure. I know when brakes are lying to their owners. And I know how to fix problems before they leave someone stranded on the roadside. That's my skill. Maybe the only one I trust. 3 months ago, everything started collapsing. A development corporation called Harrington Properties bought the entire block where my garage sits. Their vision? Demolish everything. Replace the old neighborhood with shiny storefronts, boutique coffee shops, upscale retail, and a polished fitness center full of people paying $200 a month to run on machines without going anywhere. I'm the last tenant refusing to leave. Everyone else took buyouts. Signed papers. Moved on. I didn't. My lease still has over a year left. Legally, they can't just force me out. So they changed tactics. They decided to make staying impossible. Their lawyers sent notice after notice, claiming lease violations, noise complaints, property devaluation, business disruption, damage to surrounding tenants. Every accusation fabricated. Every complaint strategic. It's harassment wrapped in legal language. Now they're suing me in civil court, trying to terminate my lease early and stick me with their legal fees. If they win, I lose the garage. If I lose the garage, I lose everything. The hearing is Monday. Tonight is Friday. That left me 3 days to prepare for the fight of my life. I had just finished a 14-hour grind. 8 hours at the garage. Then 6 more waiting tables at a diner near the highway. I work both jobs because legal representation costs money. Even cheap representation costs money. The lawyer helping me is an old friend doing this for almost nothing. Almost. Still expensive when your bank balance feels like a joke. Rain began around 10 and never slowed. By the time I left the diner, the sky looked furious. I drove home along the service road near Route 51, wipers working overtime, headlights smeared by sheets of rain. Exhaustion sat behind my eyes like concrete. All I wanted was simple. A hot shower. Dry clothes. Maybe 4 hours of sleep before waking up to review case files again. Just enough rest to function. Then I saw it. A black Mercedes-Benz sitting awkwardly on the shoulder, half off the road, hazard lights blinking weakly through the storm. 2 girls stood beside it. Young. 19, maybe 20. Completely drenched. One waved desperately at passing cars. Nobody stopped. Not one. I nearly kept driving. I'm not proud of that. But exhaustion makes selfish thoughts feel practical. I was soaked in stress already. I had my own problems. My own deadlines. My own disaster waiting Monday morning. I didn't have energy left to rescue strangers. My foot stayed on the gas for 2 more seconds. Then something stopped me. Maybe it was the way they stood too close together. Maybe it was the desperation in that raised arm. Maybe it was because I knew exactly what helpless looked like. Either way, I hit the brakes. Hard. My tires sprayed water as I pulled in behind them. I left the engine running and stepped into the storm. Rain slammed into me instantly. Cold. Heavy. Merciless. Within seconds my work shirt clung to my skin. Car trouble? I called out over the noise of the storm. One of the girls turned toward me. Dark blonde hair stuck to her face. Mascara had run into dark streaks under her eyes. She looked exhausted and embarrassed at once. It just died, she shouted back. We've been here almost an hour. Phones are dead. No one stopped. The second girl held her purse tightly against her chest like it was the last dry thing she owned. She didn't say a word. She just stared at me. Not hysterical. Not dramatic. Just frozen. The kind of fear people wear when they've been vulnerable too long and don't know whether help is actually safe. She looked at me with the kind of fear that wasn't dramatic. It was real. I walked to the front of the car and popped the hood. It only took a minute to see the problem. The battery terminals were heavily corroded, the connections loose, and the rain had made everything worse. Not a complicated fix, but not something you do on the side of the highway in the middle of a storm without tools or a jump pack. I closed the hood. This isn't going anywhere tonight, I told them. You're going to need a tow or roadside assistance. They looked at each other. One of them spoke first. We could call our dad, but what? The other one gave a small, tired laugh that didn't reach her eyes. He's busy. He's always busy. I recognized that tone. It wasn't complaining. It was the sound of someone who had stopped expecting anything different a long time ago. There's a motel about 15 minutes from here, I said. I can give you a ride. You can call for help in the morning when it's light out. They both stared at me like they weren't sure I was real. You'd really do that? The one on the left asked. I shrugged. I'm not leaving you standing out here in this. They grabbed their bags, locked the Mercedes, and climbed into my Honda. The back seat had a toolbox and a stack of old invoices. Compared to their car, mine probably looked like it belonged in a junkyard. They didn't say anything about it. The girl who got in front turned toward me as I pulled back onto the road. I'm Sophie. This is my sister, Maya. We're twins. Henry. Maya's voice came from the back, still shaky, but calmer now. Thank you for stopping. It's nothing. Sophie studied me for a second. What do you do? I'm a mechanic. I have a small garage. Maya leaned forward a little. So, you knew what was wrong with our car right away. Battery and terminals, not hard to fix, just bad timing with the rain. We drove in silence for a while. The only sound was the rain hammering the roof, and the tired rhythm of the wipers. Then Sophie spoke again. You were coming home from work. I gave a short laugh. Second job, actually. 2 jobs, garage during the day, nights at a diner near the highway. Maya was quiet for a moment before she asked, Why do you have to work so much? I hadn't planned on telling them anything. But the rain and the dark and the way they weren't looking at me like I was beneath them made it easier to be honest. I'm being sued, I said. A development company wants my garage space. They're trying to break my lease early. If I lose the hearing on Monday, I lose the business and probably everything else. Sophie turned in her seat to face me fully. But if your lease isn't up yet, how can they do that? Because they have better lawyers and more money. That's how it usually works. Maya's voice was soft. That's not fair. I kept my eyes on the road. Fair costs money. People like me usually can't afford it. None of them spoke for a while after that. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It just sat there with us. Then Sophie said, almost like she was talking to herself, "Our dad works in law, too." I glanced at her. "Lawyer?" "No," Mia answered from the back. "He's a judge." I didn't think much of it at the time. There are a lot of judges in Pennsylvania. My life was already complicated enough without adding curiosity about strangers. I just said, "You should tell him what happened tonight." Sometimes people in power need to hear how regular people get ground down. Sophie looked out at the rain-streaked window. "He hears everyone except his own daughters." They didn't say it with anger, just quiet resignation. They told me their father was always in court, or at meetings, or at political dinners. He gave them everything money could buy. Nice house, nice car, good schools, but he was rarely actually there. Maya said he thought providing was the same as loving. Sophie said sometimes they just wanted him to sit through one dinner without checking his phone. I didn't have advice that would fix any of that. I just drove. When we reached the motel, I pulled under the awning so they wouldn't get any wetter than they already were. Before they got out, Sophie turned to me. "Henry, you seem like a good person." I smiled, tired. I just didn't want to see two girls freeze to death on the side of the road. Maya shook her head gently. "No, good people always say that, so it sounds like less than what they did." Sophie pulled out her phone, which she'd been charging with a portable battery in her bag. "Can we have your number in case we need the car fixed tomorrow?" I took my wallet out, found one of the slightly bent business cards for the garage, and handed it to her. "Call that number. I open at 8. She looked at the card. "Henry Cole, I hope your hearing on Monday goes okay." I nodded. "Me too." They got out and walked into the motel lobby. I watched them disappear behind the glass doors, then pulled back onto the road. The rain was still coming down hard. My shirt was soaked. My hands were cold on the steering wheel. And I had no idea that stopping for two strangers on a highway would end up changing the rest of my life. I just knew I was tired. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel completely alone in it. Monday came too fast. The Allegheny County Courthouse smelled like old wood, paper, and nerves. I sat at the defendant's table in the only white dress shirt I still owned that wasn't stained with grease, wearing a tie I had borrowed from my neighbor. My hands were clasped under the table so no one could see they were shaking. Mr. Clark, my lawyer, sat beside me, flipping through the file one last time. He wasn't a big-shot attorney. His office was small, his hair was gray, and he looked as tired as I felt, but he believed me. At this point, that mattered more than anything else. Across the aisle, Grant Harrington sat in a gray suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Next to him was his lawyer, Davidson, a man with a smile so thin it looked sharp. Grant didn't even glance my way. To him, I was just an obstacle on a blueprint. Mr. Clark leaned closer and spoke quietly. "We have the lease. We have proof of payment. We have photos showing the garage is clean. They don't have real evidence, but they have money and a strong legal team. Stay calm. When they ask you something, just tell the truth." I nodded. My throat was dry. The bailiff stood up. "All rise. The Court of Common Pleas of Allegheny County is now in session. The Honorable Judge Benjamin Whitmore presiding." I stood. The door behind the bench opened. Judge Whitmore walked in. He was in his late 50s, tall with silver hair and a serious face. I had never seen him before in my life, but I recognized him instantly. The shape of his eyes, the way he tilted his head slightly when he looked down at the papers. The same features I had seen 3 nights ago on 2 soaked girls standing beside a broken-down Mercedes. My stomach dropped. It couldn't be. Judge Benjamin Whitmore was the father of Sophie and Maya. He took his seat, opened the file, and scanned the first page. His eyes stopped on my name. Henry Cole. For half a second, his expression shifted. Just a flicker. Then it was gone, replaced by the same professional calm. He looked up and met my eyes. He knew. I could see it. The recognition passed between us without a single word. My heart was pounding so hard. But I was sure everyone in the room could hear it. "Be seated," he said. Everyone sat. Judge Whitmore turned to page slowly, his fingers tapping once against the folder. "We are here today on the matter of Harrington Properties versus Cole Auto Repair," he began. "The plaintiff is seeking termination of a commercial lease and damages. Are both sides ready to proceed?" Davidson stood immediately. "Ready, Your Honor?" Mr. Clark answered. "Ready, Your Honor?" Judge Whitmore was quiet for a moment. His eyes stayed on the file. Then he spoke. "Before we begin, the court will take a 15-minute recess." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Davidson rose halfway. "Your Honor, is there a problem?" Judge Whitmore looked at him evenly. "Nothing that requires argument at this moment. Court is in recess." The bailiff called for everyone to rise. Judge Whitmore stood and walked out through the side door. I stayed frozen in place. Mr. Clark turned to me, frowning. "This is unusual." I couldn't answer. My mind was still trying to catch up. 10 minutes later, the bailiff approached our table. "Mr. Cole, the judge would like to see you in chambers." "Mr. Clark, you're to accompany him." Davidson immediately objected. "Your Honor cannot have exparted communication with one side." The bailiff cut him off calmly. "The judge has also requested Mr. Clark's presence. Everything will be placed on the record if necessary." Mr. Clark stood, still frowning, but motioned for me to follow. My legs felt heavy as we walked through the side door and down a short hallway. The judge's chambers were lined with dark wood and tall bookshelves filled with legal volumes. Judge Whitmore stood by the window with his hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the city. "Sit down, Mr. Cole. Mr. Clark, you as well." We sat. Judge Whitmore turned around. His face was serious, but not cold. "3 nights ago, my daughters called me from a motel off Route 51. Their car had broken down in the storm. They had been standing in the rain for nearly an hour. No one stopped." He looked directly at me. "Until you did." I swallowed. My mouth was dry. "Your Honor, I didn't know they were your daughters." "I know," he said. "That's exactly why this matters." He walked over and sat behind his desk. "Sophie and Maya told me what happened. That you had already worked 2 jobs that day. That you were exhausted. That you still stopped. That you didn't ask for anything. That you spoke to them like they were people, not an inconvenience." I looked down at my hands. "Anyone would have done that." Judge Whitmore shook his head. "No, most people didn't." "You did." Mr. Clark was staring at me now, finally understanding. Judge Whitmore continued. "This creates an ethical problem for me. If I continue to preside over this case, the plaintiff could claim bias. I've considered recusing myself." My chest tightened. "But before I made that decision," he went on, "I reviewed the entire file, and what I found suggests something more troubling than a simple lease dispute." He opened a different folder. "Harrington Properties claims your garage violated cleanliness and noise standards. Yet, several of the photographs they submitted don't even match your location. One of them shows a completely different building." Mr. Clark sat up straighter. Judge Whitmore kept going. "They also claim you were 3 months behind on rent, but your bank statements show the payments were made on time. The management company appears to have misrecorded them." I turned to Mr. Clark. He looked stunned and angry at the same time. "Most importantly," Judge Whitmore said, "I had my clerk pull the last 2 years of cases involving Harrington Properties. This is the 6th time they've used nearly identical claims to force small tenants out before their leases expired. 4 of those tenants couldn't afford to fight and simply left. 1 went bankrupt." The room felt colder. I wasn't the first. Judge Whitmore looked at me. "Mr. Cole, I will not rule in your favor simply because you helped my daughters. That would be wrong. But I also cannot sit here and pretend this is an ordinary commercial dispute when the record suggests a larger pattern of using the courts to pressure people who don't have the resources to fight back." I managed to speak, my voice rough. "So, what happens now?" Judge Whitmore stood up. I'm going back into that courtroom. I'm going to ask the plaintiff to explain the photographs, the payment discrepancies, and the pattern of similar lawsuits. If they cannot provide satisfactory answers, their case is going to have serious problems. He paused, then added in a quieter voice, My daughters told me something else. They said that in the car you told them that sometimes people in power need to hear how regular people get ground up. I lifted my head. Judge Whitmore looked out the window again. I've been a judge for over 20 years. I've heard thousands of cases, but I'm not sure I've been listening to the people behind those cases as much as I should have. He turned back to me. You reminded me of that. Not with a speech, with one decent act in the rain. I didn't know what to say. Mr. Clark put a hand on my shoulder and spoke quietly. Just breathe. Judge Whitmore walked toward the door. Let's finish this the right way. When I walked back into the courtroom, Grant Harrington was already at his table, arms crossed, looking irritated. Davidson stood beside him like a dog that had been waiting too long to be let off the leash. Judge Whitmore entered a moment later. His face gave nothing away. No one watching would have guessed he had just spoken to me in chambers. Court is back in session, he said. Davidson rose immediately, voice smooth and confident again. Your Honor, the plaintiff will demonstrate that Cole Auto Repair has repeatedly violated the terms of the lease through excessive noise, improper disposal of industrial waste, and repeated late payments. Judge Whitmore raised one hand. Before you continue, counsel, the court has some questions regarding the evidence the plaintiff has submitted. Davidson paused, clearly caught off guard. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Whitmore picked up a stack of photographs. These photographs were described by the plaintiff as being taken at Cole Auto Repair. Can you confirm the date they were taken, who took them, and verify the metadata? Davidson answered quickly. They were provided by Harrington Properties' property management team. That is not what I asked? The temperature in the room shifted. Judge Whitmore set the photos down. Can you confirm the date, the photographer, and the exact location? Davidson glanced at Grant. We can supplement the record later. So, at this moment, the answer is no. Davidson's jaw tightened. Not at this moment, Your Honor. Judge Whitmore lifted one of the photos. This image shows a blue sign in the upper left corner. According to the defendant's evidence, Mr. Cole's garage does not have that sign. How do you explain that? Mr. Clark stood up. Your Honor, we have also questioned whether these photographs depict our client's property. Judge Whitmore nodded. Noted. Grant Harrington was starting to look uncomfortable. Judge Whitmore moved to the next set of documents. The plaintiff also alleges that Mr. Cole was 3 months behind on rent. However, the defendant's bank records show 3 separate transfers made on the correct dates. Here are the transaction numbers. Why does the plaintiff's record show these payments as missing? Davidson hesitated. There may have been an accounting error. An accounting error? Judge Whitmore repeated slowly. One that led to a lawsuit seeking to terminate a lease and demand damages. Davidson said nothing. Judge Whitmore turned his attention to Grant. Mr. Harrington, would you like to address this? Grant stood adjusting his jacket. Your Honor, with all due respect, this property is undergoing redevelopment. Mr. Cole's business no longer fits the commercial vision for the area. We are simply trying to protect the value of our investment. Judge Whitmore studied him for a long moment. So, the real issue is not lease violations. The real issue is that Mr. Cole does not fit your development plans. Davidson quickly cut in. That is not what my client meant. But Grant had already said it. Judge Whitmore opened another file. The court also notes that Harrington Properties has filed 6 similar actions against small tenants in the past 2 years using nearly identical allegations. 4 of those tenants vacated before trial. 1 declared bankruptcy. Can you explain this pattern, Mr. Davidson? Davidson straightened. Objection. Those cases are not relevant here. They become relevant, Judge Whitmore replied, when they suggest a pattern of using unsubstantiated claims to pressure small tenants into leaving before their leases expire. The room was completely silent. I sat there heart-hammering. For the first time since this whole thing started, the people across from me no longer looked like they controlled the room. Mr. Clark rose, his voice stronger than I had ever heard it. Your Honor, my client has never refused to cooperate. He has simply asked that Harrington Properties honor the lease they signed or compensate him according to its terms. Instead, the plaintiff has submitted unverifiable photographs, misrecorded payments, and painted my client as a negligent tenant in order to avoid their own financial obligations. Judge Whitmore looked at Davidson. Does the plaintiff have any independent evidence showing that Cole Auto Repair created an environmental hazard, exceeded noise limits, or committed a material breach of the lease? Davidson was quiet for several seconds. We would need additional time to supplement. Judge Whitmore closed the file. No, the plaintiff has had sufficient time. You brought this man to court and threatened his livelihood. You do not get more time now. Grant's face had gone pale. Judge Whitmore continued, the plaintiff's request to terminate the lease is denied. The allegations of breach are not supported by sufficient evidence. The plaintiff shall reimburse the defendant for reasonable legal costs. Furthermore, this matter is referred to the District Attorney's Office for review regarding possible abuse of process and submission of misleading evidence. Davidson shot to his feet. Your Honor. Judge Whitmore gave him a flat look. I suggest you sit down before I order further inquiry right here. Davidson sat. The gavel came down. Case dismissed. I stayed in my chair, unable to move. Sound felt distant. I heard Mr. Clark saying something beside me. I heard papers shuffling. I heard Grant Harrington mutter something sharp under his breath to his lawyer. But the only clear thought in my head was, I still have the garage. I didn't lose everything. I stood up slowly. My legs felt unsteady. Mr. Clark shook my hand, smiling for the first time since I'd met him. You won, Henry. I looked at him, still not fully believing it. I actually won. Not only that, he said, they're going to be investigated. I turned toward the bench, but Judge Whitmore had already left the courtroom. I wanted to say something. Thank you? Anything. But maybe he didn't need that in front of everyone. He had done what he believed was right. Now I had to figure out how to accept something good without immediately waiting for it to be taken away. Outside, sunlight hit the stone steps. I stood there for a moment, breathing in air that didn't smell like old wood and tension. 3 nights ago, I had stopped in the rain because I couldn't bring myself to leave 2 strangers stranded. Today that decision hadn't directly bought me this victory, but it had made one man look at me more carefully. And when he looked, he saw what Harrington had tried to bury. My phone vibrated in my pocket, an unknown number. I answered, Mr. Cole? A girl's voice said, it's Sophie. I paused. Hey, my dad just texted us. He said the hearing ended. Are you okay? I looked up at the clear sky above the courthouse. I still have the garage. On the other end, Sophie let out a loud, happy sound. I could hear Maya laughing in the background. I knew it. Ma's voice came through. I told Sophie, good people don't lose forever. I laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd had in months. Sophie spoke again. My dad wants to invite you to dinner this weekend. Not as a judge. Just as a father whose daughters owe you for being decent in the rain. I didn't answer right away, she added. And we want to bring the Mercedes to your garage. After everything that happened, I don't trust anyone else to fix it. I smiled. I'm free after 5 on Saturday, then 7. I'll text you the address. When the call ended, I stayed on the courthouse steps a little longer. I was still broke. I still had debts. The garage was still small. Life was still hard. But for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I was being crushed. I felt like I was still standing. Saturday evening, I drove my old Honda up the hill into a neighborhood I didn't belong in. The address Sophie had sent led to a gated community with wide streets and perfectly trimmed lawns. I checked my shirt twice in the rearview mirror before I even got out of the car. It was clean, but it still looked like something a mechanic would wear on his day off. The Mercedes Sophie and Maya drove was already parked inside the open garage, looking completely out of place next to my dented Honda. I was halfway up the walkway when the front door opened. Sophie stood there smiling like I was someone they'd been waiting for. "You came." Maya appeared behind her. "Come in. Dad's in the kitchen trying to cook and we're trying to stop him from burning the house down." I stepped inside. The house was bigger than my entire garage and apartment combined. High ceilings, dark wood, expensive-looking furniture. Everything was clean and quiet in a way that made me overly aware of my boots on the floor. "Nice place," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. Maya shrugged. "It's nice. It used to feel more like a hotel, though. This week, Dad's actually been home for dinner. We're still getting used to it." Sophie nudged her. "Don't scare him." Judge Whitmore came out from the kitchen wearing jeans and a gray sweater, a dish towel in one hand. Without the black robe, he looked less like someone who decided people's futures and more like a man who wasn't entirely sure how his oven worked. "Henry," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." I shook it. "Thanks for the invitation." He looked at me steadily. "No, thank you for that night." Before I could answer, Maya cut in. "Okay, you two can do the emotional courtroom thing later. Henry, what do you want to drink?" Dinner was nothing like I expected. There were no servers. No long silent table. Sophie and Maya set the plates themselves. Judge Whitmore had made pasta that was slightly overcooked. While everyone was still moving around the kitchen, I noticed one of the cabinet doors was hanging crooked on its hinge. It bothered me enough that I asked for a screwdriver, found one in a drawer, and fixed it before we sat down to eat. When I turned around, all three of them were staring at me. Maya spoke first. "You came over for dinner, and you're already fixing things." "Occupational hazard," I said. Sophie laughed. "Dad, keep him. This house has about 47 things that need fixing." During the meal, Sophie and Mia talked more about the night their car broke down. They told their father how they had argued with him earlier that evening at some charity event because he'd left in the middle to take a work call. How they drove home angry, how the car died, how they stood in the rain calling him only to realize their phones were dead before the call even connected. Judge Whitmore listened without interrupting. He didn't offer excuses about work or responsibility. He just listened. After we finished eating, Sophie and Maya started clearing the table. Judge Whitmore nodded toward the back door. "Walk with me for a minute." We stepped out onto a wide patio that overlooked the city. The lights below looked like scattered gold threads. He stood at the railing with his hands in his pockets. "I've presided over thousands of cases in my career," he said after a while. "I always believed I was fair, but being fair in a courtroom doesn't mean I was fair at home." I stayed quiet. He continued. "Sophie and Maya have been telling me for years that I was never really present. I used to think they were being dramatic, that children from comfortable families complain because they don't understand sacrifice. But that night when they called from the motel and told me a stranger who was already exhausted still stopped to help them, I couldn't sleep." He looked over at me. "You didn't know who they were. You had nothing to gain. You had your own problems, and you still stopped. Meanwhile, their own father has spent years not stopping enough." I watched the city lights for a moment. "You can still start," I said. He gave a small, tired smile. "I'm a judge. I know time that's already passed doesn't come back." "No," I answered. "But the time that's left does." Judge Whitmore was quiet for a long time after that. "I understand now why my daughters think so highly of you." I felt my face warm. "I just fix cars and pour coffee." "No," he said, "you're the kind of person this world needs more of. Someone who still stops even when they're sinking themselves." We stood there without speaking for a while. Then he asked, "How's the garage?" "I still have debt. I still work extra hours, but at least I still have it." He nodded. "Sophie mentioned she wants to bring the Mercedes to you. I'll charge her the normal rate." He actually laughed at that. "Good." When we went back inside, Sophie and Ma were arguing over which movie to watch. They pulled me into the conversation like I'd been part of it for years instead of just one night. I ended up on their couch with a glass of water, listening to two sisters debate horror versus comedy while their father sat in the armchair, pretending he wasn't already falling asleep. The house didn't feel like a showcase anymore. It felt like a family that was slowly remembering how to be in the same room without performing for each other. Sophie sat down beside me and spoke quietly so only I could hear. He's different this week. He's come home for dinner 3 times already. Maya leaned in from the other side and he only checked his phone twice. That's a record. From the armchair, Judge Whitmore sighed without opening his eyes. I'm trying. Sophie looked at him, her voice softer. We know. I sat between them, feeling strange and quiet. I wasn't related to these people. I didn't come from money or status or any of the things that usually connected someone to a house like this. But that night in the rain had pulled our lives across each other's paths anyway. Not like some cheap miracle, just like a reminder that sometimes people save each other in ways no one plans for. 3 months later, the sign above Cole Auto Repair still hung crooked on one side. Harrington Properties was under investigation. A couple of former tenants who had been pushed out the same way I almost was started reaching out to lawyers. The local paper ran a short piece about their pattern of lawsuits. Grant Harrington stopped driving past my garage with that smug look on his face. I was still working. I opened the garage at 7 o'clock in the morning, ate lunch standing next to the toolbox, and sometimes still took evening shifts at the diner to pay down the debt faster. But I wasn't doing it out of pure survival anymore. There was space to breathe now. Customers started coming in more steadily after the hearing. Some of them had heard the story. Most of them came because Sophie and Maya had apparently told everyone they knew to bring their cars to me. The Mercedes was the first one I worked on after everything settled. I replaced the battery, cleaned the terminals, and checked the whole electrical system. When I handed Sophie the bill, she frowned. You charge too little. I charged what it's worth. Maya shook her head. You're terrible at using connections. I know how to fix cars, I said. That's enough. They laughed. Saturday nights at the Whitmore house slowly turned into something regular. At first, I felt awkward showing up. After a while, it just became part of the week. I fixed a leaking faucet in their kitchen, rehung a door in the laundry room, changed the spark plugs on Maya's car. In exchange, they gave me a seat at the table without making me feel like a guest who needed to earn it. Judge Whitmore was changing, too, in small ways that mattered. He started coming home for dinner at least 2 nights a week. He left his phone in a drawer during meals. He asked Sophie and Maya questions that had nothing to do with school or achievements. One evening, after the girls had gone upstairs, he followed me out to my car because he said it was making a strange noise. I popped the hood and checked the serpentine belt while he stood beside me. Have you thought about expanding? He asked. I think about it. Money doesn't think the same way. He smiled a little. I know someone who runs a small business support program through the city. It's not a personal favor. It's not because of the case. They have funds set aside for independent repair shops affected by redevelopment. You'd qualify. I looked up from the engine. You don't have to do that. I know, but I can give you the information. What you do with it is up to you. He handed me a business card. I took it. Thanks. He glanced around the small garage. You know, Henry, for a long time, I thought justice only happened inside a courtroom. Maybe part of it is also making sure people like you don't get erased from a map just because they can't afford expensive lawyers. I closed the hood. Justice sounds better when it doesn't come too late. He nodded. It does. 6 months after the hearing, I received a modest grant from the program. It wasn't enough to turn the garage into something fancy, but it was enough to replace 2 old machines, repaint the sign, and hire a 20-year-old kid named Louise, who had been turned away from every other shop because he had no experience. I saw myself in him, so I gave him a chance. A year after the night it rained, Sophie and Mia decided to have a small birthday dinner at a quiet restaurant instead of throwing a big party. They invited me, Louise, their father, and a few close friends. Halfway through the meal, Sophie stood up with a glass of water. "A year ago," she said, looking at me, "Maya and I were standing on the side of the road in the rain, thinking no one was going to stop. Then Henry stopped. After that, everything changed. The car got fixed. Our dad started getting fixed." Judge Whitmore sighed. "Sophie." Everyone laughed. "She kept going anyway. And maybe we got fixed a little too." Maya looked across the table at me. "Thanks for not driving past." I held my glass and tried to think of something that didn't sound corny. In the end, I just said the simplest thing I could. "I'm glad I stopped." Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I stood alone in front of the garage under the new sign. Cole Auto Repair. Honest work, fair price. I thought about that Friday night, how tired I had been, how close I came to just driving past two strangers in the rain. If I had kept going, everything would be different right now. I probably would have lost the garage. Sophie and Maya would still believe their father never really listened to them. Judge Whitmore would still be fair in court, but absent at home. One small decision didn't fix the whole world, but it opened a door for me. That door led to keeping the garage. For Sophie and Maya, it led to a father who was finally learning how to show up. For Judge Whitmore, it led to remembering that behind every file, there's a person trying not to get crushed. And for me, it taught me that kindness doesn't always come back right away, and it doesn't always come back in the shape you expect, but it doesn't disappear either. It goes somewhere. It touches something. It changes something. Then one day when you're standing in a courtroom or beside a broken car or in the middle of your own mess, it finds its way back to you in a form you never saw coming. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and looked up at the clear night sky. My phone buzzed. A message from Maya. "Movie night this Saturday. Dad promised he won't check his email. You have to be there as a witness." I smiled and typed back, "I'll be there." I put the phone in my pocket and walked to my car. This time when I drove past the stretch of road where I first met them in the rain, I didn't see a storm. I just remembered one thing. There are nights when you think you have nothing left to give anyone. But if you still stop, if you still help a stranger, if you still choose to do the right thing when no one's watching, that single moment might end up saving the rest of your